Welcome to the Open Loop podcast. It's a podcast exploring the people, companies, and ideas shaping the future of neurotechnology. I'm Chay Carter, the founder of Carter Sciences, Recce Neuro, and the Neurotech newsletter. In each episode, I sit down with founders, operators, researchers, investors, and leaders building the edge of neuroscience, neurotechnology, and healthcare. We'll have honest conversations about people's journeys into the neurotech industry, what they're currently building, how it's going, the realities, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and what the future holds for the neurotech industry in general. We are joined today on the Open Loop podcast by Daniel Powell, the founder of Spark Biomedical. Daniel, fantastic to have you on. I would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience, tell them a bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Like you said, I'm Daniel Powell. I'm one of the co-founders of Spark Biomedical. I've been doing med device and specifically neuromodulation for about the last 22 years of my career. Before that, I was a consultant doing all kinds of things, even was a Y2K consultant back in the day.
Fantastic. I mean, I started my career as an investment banking recruiter and did a lot of business analysis and project management recruitment back in the early 2000s. So very familiar with that world. I mean, how did you make the leap from a KPMG consultant to a medical device executive?
So I had my first midlife crisis and decided to open an internet gaming cafe. This was how long ago this was. And the director of electrical engineering for St. Jude Medical would come in on his lunch break to play games. And we got to talking, and I needed to get a job because I was losing money hand over fist. And there was an opening at St. Jude Medical Neuro, and I beat all odds and got a job there and never looked back.
That's incredible. Gaming cafe. You don't hear about them too often anymore.
So I went out of a professional career, opened a retail stop, was standing there on my feet all day selling video game time to kids, and then got back into it. So
fantastic.
I always had an entrepreneurial interest.
I mean, the neuromod space from a gaming cafe is quite the leap. I mean, what was that learning curve like? What did you know about it actually before going into it? Or was it completely fresh?
It was really interesting because I thought I was going to have a real steep learning curve. And so the interviewers were like, I don't know. But I had a strong software background. I'd done development. One of my previous careers was at KPMG, and my job was to go into a new business, to drop a team into whatever environment, and we had to figure out the unmet need and come up with a solution. And so I just used those same skills. When I joined, I was a software analyst first, which means I was defining software requirements, designing the interface, stuff I had done before. I built apps before their app software, actually built some bookie software once so for off Vegas betting. So I came in knowing how to elicit requirements and then build solutions to meet those requirements. And that's really where the matchup, and then learning the science, I just fell in love with it. It was just, understanding how we're putting electricity into the nervous system and that's affecting organ function. I would say I just couldn't get enough of it. And I just, was in a mood to learn and apply the science compared to my technical abilities.
It's interesting, isn't it? I feel like everybody who gets their first exposure to neurotech or neuromodulation, I suppose, in its first iteration, sort of gets obsessed with it immediately. And just like, this is insane how it actually works. And I think even now, I've had conversations like this recently where you talk to people about what neuromodulation is, a spinal cord stimulation, but even further, deep brain stimulation, been around for decades. People still haven't heard of it and still think it's science fiction. The concept of implanting an electrical stimulator is bizarre.
Yeah, I remember I was in Dusseldorf, Germany for the 30th anniversary of DBS, and that was 15 years ago. So yeah, it's still,
yeah.
So I originally was in the software department and working on the spinal cord stim system. I actually got Inventor of the Year with a couple of others, where we developed a new way to move the stimulation field up and down a percutaneous lead. And then the DBS group grabbed me, brought me over to marketing to do upstream marketing, and I got to launch DBS Europe and just see. it was just such an incredible time in my career. I was young, energetic. I didn't mind sitting for 12 hours on coach from Dallas to London. And I got to see hospital systems all over Europe and Australia. You go from the blinders of, I only know how the US works, to in 2 years seeing, 36 countries. It was really cool.
Amazing. I love that. It's still a bit of a struggle, I think, in Europe too, with some of the neuromod accessibility to patients, but it's growing all the time. And I actually spoke to somebody recently in India who was saying they're doing sort of 1,000 DPS procedures a year right now. And it's just a huge,
Oh,
huge
my goodness.
uptick. Yeah, it's madness, I think. But yeah, a really, really exciting time globally for the business, considering where it came from, right? We're talking 20 years ago. You did 7 years at St. Jude. Did it turn into Abbott then? Were you there for that change?
No, I was there right after A&S became
Mm,
St. Jude. So I was part of that cultural transition. But I was out before Abbott. But there was always rumors. It was like Johnson's going to buy us, Abbott's going to buy us. It was always the rumor mill that there was a plan to roll that up.
yeah, I love that. I mean, those rumors still go on now, don't they? Really, but
Yeah, yeah.
from there you jumped over to LivaNova again. I presume that was vagus nerve stimulation. That was probably the third like major pillar in neuromodulation. How was that change?
It was pretty interesting. Culturally, the companies were pretty similar. They were small. We still had that small neuromod. One of the success stories, A&S was one of the great startup success stories. Cyberonics at the time, great success story. Continuing trying to grow and trying to add a second indication. Of course, Cyberonics struggled with losing depression and then pivoting into sleep apnea. But there was a profound change in how the disease state looked. So the spinal cord stem, did it make your pain go away? It's subjective, but the stimulation's happening and but DBS was exciting. Like you're in the DBS operating room, standing right next to the surgeon. There's a hole in somebody's head. You can literally see their brain. They put the wire in. The patient is awake. Their hands are shaking. You turn on electricity, their hands go steady and they can sign their name for the first time. And you and the doctor are like, this works, is just so objective. Going into epilepsy, it was like, we're going to put this thing in your neck and you're going to slowly have less seizures over the next 2 to 3 years. And it's like, so you're still having seizures. And we would try to sell, they were shorter seizures, they were less impactful, your recovery time was better. Every seizure is a minor piece of brain damage, right? It's an electrical storm in your head that goes off. And so the doctor and patient belief was really a bigger uphill battle just for that disease state. And then you get into what every neuromodulation company has a challenge with. I'll just give them one more pill. I'll just try one more drug combo. And so you're always up against a very easy script to convince to switch to the implant. So that was really eye-opening. And when we were starting Spark, it was something I was like, I don't want to be in such subjective indications, such
Yeah.
subjective effectiveness. And the first time I saw somebody detoxing off an electroacupuncture detox, and in 30 minutes, they go from just like in distress, sweating, high anxiety to, and 30 minutes later, they're laughing and smiling. And you're like, that works. That is profound. So I love stuff that, it seems kind of obvious, but profound clinical effects.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's quite the jump from LivaNova to Spark, right? I mean, it's vagus nerve stimulation at Spark, non-invasive, different indication. I mean, tell us about that transition from the implantable neuromod space, which obviously serves a purpose, right? The implantable sector will always exist, extreme indications, extreme needs from patients, but there's this big push towards wearable, non-invasive now. Tell me about that journey for you from that to where we are now.
Yeah, so when I was at Cyberonics, we had an investment in a German auricular neurostim company that I made fun of and said, that'll never work. So we'll set the stage. I was not a believer. But I met what would become my two co-founders, Dr. Navid Kadopoulos and Dr. Alejandro Kovalin, both neuroscientists. And they were combining their knowledge of vagus nerve stem and trigeminal stem. There was Alejandro had a hypothesis that you put these two together and you're going to get an outsized effect. And what really started making them believers was like Naveed's work was in stroke recovery, what became microtransponder, so upper limb stroke recovery, vagus nerve using neuroplasticity. And these groups out of Cambridge were reproducing his implanted work with a wearable. So he was, he was starting to become a believer and go, I need to look at this.
Mm.
Alejandro built the Monarch system, which stimulates the trigeminal nerve, now on market for ADHD. So he was already a believer. And they talked me into it. And I remember the first time they were putting like this prototype earpiece on me, and Naveed was like, "You have really nice ears." And I was like, "That's a weird world I'm getting into. But thank you." And now, I never meant to get into a business where I have to touch people's ears all the time, but I did. it's like I'm going to touch your ear now. Just here we go.
Flattery will get you everywhere, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
it. I love that. I mean, tell us a bit more then about the technology itself. What does it look like? And yeah, I mean, like the opioid withdrawal space is somewhere. It's almost something that's really, really obvious to some degree as something. The withdrawal symptoms. Targeting that is it the first company to have targeted that with the neurostimulator? What does the landscape look like?
Yeah, so we were not the first. Before us came an acupuncture system, and if you
Sure.
go back before electroacupuncture, which you might remember the P-stem device out of Austria that kind of had a sordid history because of reimbursement. But if you go back to the 80s, like everybody had an aunt that had an acupuncture needle in their ear trying to quit smoking, and they would wiggle it to alleviate the withdrawal and the cravings. So we're just picking up something that the Chinese figured out 6,000 years ago. Progress to electroacupuncture and then progress to us, which is, transcutaneous versus percutaneous. So ours is a hydrogel that goes on the ear at those nerve endings. It's all hitting those same nerve endings. One of the unique challenges that makes our system special is the trigeminal nerve speaks a different language than the vagus nerve, specifically in frequencies. So we actually built a dual stem engine that can stimulate independently the vagus nerve at 15 or 30 hertz and independently the trigeminal nerve at 100 hertz. So that kind of makes the electronics a little more complex. And but yeah, we hit the trigeminal nerve at this little divot right in front of your ear. If you've ever rubbed your temple area or this while you're stressed, you're actually releasing endorphins, which is part of the mechanism of action. And then we used to target the symbicontia, this little area right above your ear canal. It's really difficult to hit. Ears are really greasy. And one of our big inventions, it sounds so crazy saying invention, but we moved the lead behind the ear on the mastoid. It's a branch of the vagus nerve coming out of the cranium called the Arnold's nerve. And so now our earpiece is this nice horseshoe, super easy to put on. And I'll say years of having something that was inside the ear was a pain, and getting out of the ear has been a good pivot.
It's interesting, isn't it? I feel like the vagus nerve stimulation market, I know that's only part of what you do, but I wrote an article about this recently. There's just so many different indications being focused on it and different areas of the body where you can stimulate it too. And obviously LivaNova is a good example. We've got depression studies, they've got epilepsy studies, they've got yourself, obviously. There's anti-anxiety, wearables, vagus nerve stimulator you can buy on Amazon. Let's not get into the questionable.
Like yeah,
let's not question the clinical validity of those. There isn't any. But let's talk about the vagus nerve.
Well, and so this, and it does sound ridiculous. You're like, how can this one nerve affect all those items? So you go down to what the 2 or 3 fundamental things we know the vagus nerve modulates. And so we'll start with the autonomic system, the fight or flight versus rest and digest. And if you think of any time you're stuck in kind of a high fight or flight, you're cranking out cortisol, you're having stress, and that ripples into all kinds of diseases. And so, and withdrawal is extreme fight or flight. You literally believe you're going to die if you don't use again, because it's a disorder in the amygdala that's balancing all these things. And so anytime you increase parasympathetic tone and reduce sympathetic tone, and you improve fight or flight, anxiety, stress, depression, PTSD, anything that you can kind of draw back to that autonomic disruption is going to get better. So that's kind of one why it works on so many things. My sister used the device, and she had a disease called Raynaud's disease, where your fingers get real cold. And she's like, my Raynaud's went away. And I asked Alejandro, why did this happen? He goes, that's an autonomic disorder, and you're fixing the autonomics. So at our heart, we're an autonomics company. The other component that we've seen come out of the Feinstein Institute and all Kevin Tracy's work is the inflammation. We just recently saw Set Point Medical finally get an FDA indication for rheumatoid arthritis. Well, that's all that work out of the Feinstein Institute. And that's sending the signal not to the center of the brain and the brainstem, but down the vagus nerve, which comes out of your cranium. It's your only cranial nerve that comes out of the head. And it goes and touches every organ, most importantly, the spleen. And through a cascade of neurotransmitters, you have a systemic inflammation reduction. Well, anytime you reduce inflammation, how many diseases get better? So, and that was one of the things we always hypothesized at Cyberonics for epilepsy is, were we interrupting the seizure? Or are we actually reducing inflammation that stops the seizures? Because we know for epilepsy, if you go on a pure keto diet and reduce all inflammation, you can actually stop all seizures. The problem is you eat one wrong thing, you come out of ketosis, and you have a horrible seizure. So it's not as popular. So that's why you see so many disease states around the vagus nerve being treated. It's fix inflammation, fix autonomics, and a lot of things get better.
That's really interesting. It's a fascinating market. I mean, there's just so much potential out there, isn't there? I think, and I feel like we're just kind of getting started on it. I think there's the accessibility to different neurotechnologies too is a really fundamental piece, and I think a large part of that comes to the communication of what the technology actually does, and how does the everyday person understand that? I think the first thing that people often try and do is prescribe. There's the drug treatment is always the first place to go, but I do feel like there's this almost slow, it's like a slow turning cruise ship at the moment of this understanding of what's happening in neurotechnology, how stimulating various parts of the body can alleviate various ailments. And I feel like what you guys are building in relation to like withdrawals, for instance, is a really, not, I wouldn't say every day, but really understandable because of cause and effect, really, of what's going on. I mean, how's it going with the expansion of the business and the expansion to patients? What's that journey been like? Because no one has an easy time in neurotech getting their device in front of people.
No, the problem with addiction is it tends to take all your money away. All right. And it's very expensive. So we're highly dependent on reimbursement. So we're still working on reimbursement for a wider commercial rollout. On this journey, though, we were contacted by the Feinstein Institute, like I mentioned, Kevin Tracy, on a new novel application in hemostasis. So 24 years ago, so long story short, still limited rollout for addiction. We're focusing on things like the VA, county programs that can pay for it that aren't dependent on reimbursement. Most of our efforts now are going towards this new novel hemostasis application that was discovered. It was a DARPA project 24 years ago. And the other thing so when they were studying the white blood cells for inflammation, they noticed changes to the platelets. And they're like, okay, we're affecting platelet behavior as well. And so they came up with this idea called the neural tourniquet, which was, can we control hemostasis with the nervous system? And the long story short is you can, and you can stimulate ahead of a wound, prime the platelets that are housed in the spleen, and you get a 50% reduction in blood loss. A huge market here. So soldiers use this before going on the battlefield. And literally, we did a large mammal study with a 25% liver lobectomy, unsurvivable wound, stimulated before this surgery, and the unsurvivable wound became survivable. I mean, it's profound. So think anything that needs a transfusion, any surgery with a drain tube for blood that increases length of stay, any non-compressible hemorrhage, GI bleed, postpartum hemorrhage, things that you can't put a gel or a tourniquet on, and you want to prevent blood loss, specifically transfusions, this has a fit. So we're really excited. We're getting that. We're doing our final clinical study.
Wow.
Again, we consistently show a 50% reduction in blood loss every application we do. So we're highly focused on bringing that to market. And I'll get back to what I love doing, which is selling to hospitals and doctors versus rehab clinics. And that'll be the majority of our focus. we're not abandoning addiction. It's just,
Yeah, yeah.
it's always going to
Well,
be a tougher battle.
you guys have got some interesting things going on at the moment, right? Obviously, apart from this, we've got a new CEO come in recently, Anya Kramer. We've also got OnBody as well, which is sort of the spin-off. Not really sure where to start here. Should we start with OnBody and how that came to life? Because that's maybe not as recent as Anya's appointment.
Yeah, what started off is we were just trying to prove the neural tourniquet worked, and we were trying to figure out a clinical model that didn't require us to be in the surgical suite measuring blood loss or doing a worse estimated blood loss. And so one of our hematologist advisors suggested we look at heavy menstrual bleeding, specifically women with von Willebrand disease, which is a clotting disorder. And we went and ran a pilot study, saw enormous results, 57% reduction in blood loss, menstrual blood loss, 50% reduction in cramps, which that's your autonomic system uh, effect, improvements in mood, that's your endorphin release from the trigeminal nerve. And so we decided that we actually had a unique women's health opportunity here. And so we created a sub company totally focused on women's health and to advance this. So it's on market as OnBody and selling as a wellness device, but we will get an FDA indication for that. And the goal is to make it over the counter and not require a prescription. And then
Yeah.
recently, like you said, bringing in a new CEO, has IPO experience under her belt, multiple exits, looking at all these opportunities and starting to make some exit deals with some of our IP just made a lot of sense. And then I'm just get to pivot and I'm just focused really on getting the surgical blood loss product to market.
Yeah, yeah. We often see businesses get to a certain point and the original CEO is not the person to take it any further. And often that means different things for that. So yeah, maybe a board seat, whatever. So but for yourself, you're staying on board and taking more of a commercial mind to it. Is that your role going forward for Spark?
That is, and I've raised 35 million for the company. We got 2 FDA indications. But we had our last board meeting the other day and I wasn't having to run it, and it was really nice. It was I got to sit back and I had one slide that I had to worry about. So I'm happy to pass the torch. Anya's a fantastic hire. I think our investors will be very rewarded with her taking us into the next phase of this journey.
Yeah, but it's exciting and too from her perspective, all the stuff that you guys have built as 3 business lines essentially, and probably more in the pipeline. I
Exactly.
mean, yeah, OnBody is really fascinating actually, just because I think the women's health and neurotech crossover, which we're seeing more and more of. There's a few companies out there doing really exciting things. It's again, like I think the best ideas often seem like the most obvious ones, and I feel like the creation of OnBody and the technology there, and Amy too. I've had the luxury of having a chat with her a little while back. She's in great hands over there. Someone deeply passionate about that market. So it's a really, and also Alejandro too. I had the pleasure of bumping into him in a line for a happy hour going to a Saluda after Nan's drink in 2023. So there you go. I've had
I
some
think it was
weird
at that event. I
connections.
was at that event too. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Or maybe we crossed paths. I can't remember. It was the end of the evening. Who knows? So, but that's really, really exciting. I mean, what is the short, medium, and long term look like for you guys now? Then you've got obviously so many things going on. Lots of new leadership coming in. What's the immediate need for you guys? And yeah, what does 2027 and onwards look like?
Yeah, really the goal is to spend the next 12 to 15 months hitting several major milestones: own body growth, clear regulatory pathway for the neural tourniquet, leading to the submission to the FDA for an approval for neural tourniquet for surgical bleeding. With those milestones, raise a Series B, and that's why we need someone with Anya's connections and experience. And because we are venture back now, but we're kind of going to be a bigger play with that Series B to really launch the neural tourniquet the right way at the end of 2027. If you think about this product should be attached to every surgery that has, like I said, blood loss, ooze, anything where we can reduce the length of stay or transfusions. It's just going to be a huge cost savings. Probably don't in the American healthcare system, but probably the British as well. A surgery such as total hip replacement is paid on a fixed DRG. Maybe the insurance company pays the hospital $72,000, and that includes surgery, all the supplies for the surgery, and 2 days of recovery before they're discharged. And if you need a transfusion blood, that's $1,250 a bag. And so it's like, if you needed 4 bags of blood or 2, that's pure profit loss.
Mm-hmm.
So the value proposition's huge to use this device on all these surgeries. And then length of stay, if you can just get the patient out of the hospital 6 to 8 hours earlier and turn that bed, you're paid on a fixed, a fixed price. It's all upside for the healthcare systems. And I would probably assume it's similar like that in
Yeah,
England.
yeah. Well, yeah, all over Europe as well. I think it's
Yeah.
a continent of almost like 100% insurance, but what comes with that is complex insurance policies and like you said, time in bed. It all matters. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting how the business has evolved into this from when I first started tracking you guys a few years ago and looking at the opioid space and then seeing Own Body and then now seeing this. It's really impressive to see how it's changed, but also I think testament to you guys too and your innovation and how you kind of constantly bringing new products to the market and running new clinical trials, and it's quite impressive, really.
We founded this on a clinical first mentality. Of course, both my co-founders are neuroscientists, so
That
that
helps. Yeah.
is the focus. But we do really good science. Really, um, that is the frustrating thing with the wellness devices. They don't have the clinical studies to back them up, or they're not real. That is the frustration with some of the acupuncture devices, that they don't continue to move the science forward. So we've wanted that to be our defining attribute when people think of Spark, is that we move the science forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, there have been so many companies that have hang their hat on like an indication or a technology, and it's really refreshing to see you guys, looking at things from a really broad perspective. I know Chris does amazing work for you guys too. I've had the pleasure of chatting to him a couple of times. But what do you see? There's so many changes happening in neurotech all the time, and maybe this is a nice sort of like closing question, but form factor changes all the time. We spoke about implantable versus non-invasive. We spoke about direct to consumer stuff. I think there's a big push for more clinical validity within the direct to consumer market. Obviously, vagus nerve indications are growing all the time, and so the treatments are expanding massively. And what comes with that is new companies, new funding, and so forth. But we've also got this eruption of brain-computer interfaces and closed-loop technology now more so than before. Reading and reacting. What do you think the future holds for the neurotech industry, and what kind of excites you? What niche little weird corner of neurotech, and there are many of them, are you particularly excited about?
Yeah, I think the closed loop thing is something everybody wants to add. It's on everyone's roadmap. If it's not, it should be. We're getting. I remember I was doing brain computer interface before it was called brain computer interface. We were just trying to do deep brain stimulation with local field potentials within the brain to figure out if we're stimulating the right part of the STN and to move amplitude. So 20 years ago, we were saying we need that closed loop. I think the closed loop for Kala Health on their wristband really helped their reimbursement
Hmm.
strategy. If I remember those talks by Renee, and I think it's going to be critical. Is it just, though, are all those recordings coming from Apple Watch and your Whoop device and all this, or are they custom sensors as part of our solution? I think there'll be a whole hybrid of decisions along those lines because, do you reinvent the wheel now that everybody's got their digital health monitoring on board, or their Aura Ring? Um, those are the kind of things we're discussing here. It's like Aura Ring already does heart rate variability really well. Like, if they have that, do we need to
Yeah.
build a new heart rate variability monitor? So those are some of the, I think, challenges of reinventing a wheel, but you then don't know the data. I don't know. I'm kind of
Yeah.
rambling here, but it's
No,
a,
no. Well, I think like
future.
form factor's key, isn't it, as well? Like I think there's always like eruption of EEG technology as well, and trying to make sense of what's going on in our brain. I think machine learning has kind of caught up with some of the readings, but also I hear a lot of people say like, is EEG even the best technology to read, signals, brain signals. Is it the best way to go about it? Is that even going to change? I mean, it's already 100-year-old technology, and you think about like,
Exactly.
what are we doing? So yeah, I think it's always interesting in neurotech, and then it's like a microcosm of a larger debate of existing technology exists and how can we get the most out of existing technology, but also at the same time, where's the innovation happening on new technologies, and how long and how quickly can we get that to market? Because the reason we're using existing technology is we know it works, it's pretty been approved to some degree, versus, I think this BCI conversation at the moment where, we're reading brain signals, we're processing them, we're decoding them, and we're putting it on an app. That is a brain-computer interface. It doesn't have to be an implantable neurostimulator or, controlling a mouse cursor on a screen. It could be
Yeah,
many, many different formats. But yeah, we'll see. It's a weird and wonderful time to be in the market.
I love it. It's exciting, and like I said, now 20 whatever years ago, I sat there in that training room learning the gate control theory of spinal cord stem, and I was just fell in love with it. And it's cool to see how far it's
Yeah.
evolved and become more commonplace.
Yeah. The spinal cord stimulation market is probably another long conversation for another day.
I
That's
am so happy not to be in it. Who, who need? I'll say all the controversy. Who needs 7 companies
yeah.
killing each other for a handful of pain docs? It's oof.
Yeah.
I when we were starting Spark, I said the one thing I'm going to say is we're not a pain company.
Yeah.
We're an addiction company or whatever. I was like, it's just too many pain companies.
That's I wrote an article on this recently, and it's just it took me bloody ages to get it all right. There's so many companies, a little bit of innovation happening, some really, really cool things, but it's one of those things where you go, this is a really established multi-billion-dollar business. That's great. Let's just let it be its own thing. Maybe it just needs to be run by 3. Maybe Boston need to keep buying people and build a big portfolio. And then, I mean, Medtronic just spent $600 million on SBR. So again, a conversation for another day, but it's a
Yeah,
fascinating space. And I mean, I always think about what are the other industries that are kind of catching up? I mean, there was over 100 million recently invested in the urology market, and sacral
I
nerve,
think the
tibial
big
nerve.
win. I think the big win for neurotechnology, especially wearables, is ResMed's purchase of Noctrix Health for restless leg syndrome. So going from CPAP and sleep to this other quality of sleep, and that's a $370 million exit. The wearable market needed to point to a
Yeah,
win.
yeah, for
Uh,
sure. I mean, the sleep space in neuromod and hypoglossal nerve stimulation is fascinating. I mean, obviously dominated by Inspire, but we've got this Nyxoah, emergence happening, and they're gaining some traction. But obviously, let's not forget Levanova too,
Levanova. Yep.
entering. Yeah, I mean, I think be playing around in that sleep. That was an acquisition as well, wasn't it? What were
Yeah.
they called?
And I was there. I forgot the name. It was the company from San Diego, but yes,
Yeah, I mean, there's all these small markets are growing massively now as well. In the epilepsy market, not just the implantable Levanova and NeuroPace market. Now we're seeing more and more and more wearable devices that are more about seizure detection. There's a lot of collaborations going on with pharma, so alerting patients of when to take medication. But then there's a lot of the time in neurotech, there's a patient population that is underserved by the pharmaceutical industry, like mental health, for instance, only tackles a portion of that, and neurodegenerative is probably the worst. So seeing these growing markets in that space, but then it's either an implant or there's not that many wearable take-home devices in neurotech yet that are FDA approved. I think that's what's fascinating about it. Like, we're going to see more and more and more of that. Like, here's the
they're
device,
definitely
take it
coming.
home.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a few approvals happen, right? I think in the mental health space, but yeah, we'll see. There's a lot going on. Um,
absolutely. It's
well,
hot
Dan,
time.
yeah, thank you so much for the time. Where can people find out more about Spark? What's the website?
Sparkbiomedical.com. Go to the science section and look at all the clinical studies we have going. It is an impressive list of areas we're exploring.
I'm excited to see what else you grow into over the years to come. But thanks very much, Daniel. Appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you so much.
This podcast is brought to you by Carter Sciences, the headhunting practice that covers not only headhunting, but also fractional talent work for startups who need help, but don't want to spend those big recruitment fees, wanting to work on a more hourly basis with companies, and also career coaching for neurotech professionals. Goal is to provide cost-effective solutions across all neurotech hiring needs.